Welcome to The Beat. I'm Ari Melber. We begin with this prospect of potentially the United States hitting Iran. And then what certain independent reporting and critics argue is a kind of unserious or at times even circus or reality show atmosphere surrounding one of the most important decisions a president could make. And while Donald Trump has certainly changed the artifice and the traditions of national leadership and the presidency in ways that sometimes his supporters love and ways other people criticize, this is distinct when we talk about whether or not we would strike in that region or do things that make it more likely that we have a U.S. involved war or regional war. Now, today, the White House made some news by saying that Donald Trump, the president, is mulling whether to strike Iran, and he will make that decision within 2 weeks. Now, on the ground, we know that overnight Iran has done a bombing campaign that hit this Israeli hospital, injuring over 240 people. You can see the visuals there, Israel's health ministry discussing the damage. Israel, though, also continuing its attacks, and it started what it said was a necessary strike to deal with alleged nuclear capabilities, but it started the most recent volleys back and forth. Meantime, Trump is also clashing with some of his own cabinet officials, the people he picked to do the intelligence and military planning, but in the sort of freewheeling atmosphere of this administration, remember, where 1 month Elon Musk is a super employee kind of overseeing the whole cabinet, the next month he's gone. Well, likewise, some of the people that Trump said were kind of going to run things this year may not be. Washington Post reporting that neither intelligence chief Gabbard nor Pentagon chief Hegseth are really in starring roles right now on the inner circle advisors on issues that, of course, involve intelligence and the entire military overseen by Hegseth. Quote, nobody is talking to Hegseth, says one official. And by the way, as a procedural matter, it's concerning. If you don't want war with Iran, maybe you think it's a positive because you do want someone like him iced out. Now, I should tell you, the Pentagon is objecting to this entire set of reporting. They say it's completely false. Trump also reportedly influenced by the more hawkish or bellicose on-air content in Fox News, according to one report in Rolling Stone, where hosts, guests, and commentators are effusively pro-war and pro-regime change in their messaging. Bigger picture, though, and this has always been an interesting thing, for all of the criticism of Donald Trump's desire to flex with military power, to use the military in the United States, something we've been covering over the last 2 weeks, and generally to play what he calls a kind of tough or macho card, he is someone who, like some of the other more recent figures in the conservative space, like Tucker Carlson, has vocally been opposed to what they view as the Bush era expansive kind of over-involved role in two wars in the Middle East. And so you have that, but then you still have the Fox programming and other loud voices that want to be sort of automatically, quote, tough, even if it means risking a new regional war that very few people seem to want. And so what we're witnessing in real time on a big high stakes issue is an Iran debate that is roiling MAGA.
The Bush era doctrine of regime change wars in the Middle East is foolish. It's costly.
Be all in, President Trump, in helping Israel eliminate the nuclear threat.
The same crowded Fox all weekend has been sounding the war toxins.
I'm a warmonger because I think that these 7th century primitive barbarians with 21st century technology should be removed.
No, this is not America first. War is not America first.
I'm not one that wants to get involved in things. I'm not. But we have no choice. They are our enemy.
And so you can see with some of the newer voices how it goes back and forth. And by the way, if you believe in open and free debate, First Amendment rights, some of the things that Donald Trump, when it comes to other stories, is of course against, and he's not been supporting everyone's dissent, certainly not in colleges. But if you believe in that kind of thing, it is positive, and shout out to any of the platforms that are supporting a freewheeling open debate. Sometimes in the run-up to military action, let alone war, we haven't had that in this country. So whether it's a red or MAGA platform or not, shout out to us having this debate. On the other hand, there are critics who say that amidst the debate, Donald Trump isn't being super serious, and that he seems to want to milk the drama of it, to tease, quote unquote, what'll come in the next week or two, which is, of course, not how you really prepare for battle usually, because you don't want to give Iran a heads up if you are going to decide this in 13 days and do something. And some argue it almost has taken on, predictably, an almost reality TV show style approaching war?
You don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it.
I have ideas as to what to do.
I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. The next week is going to be very big.
I like to make the final decision 1 second before it's due.
Maybe less than a week, maybe less.
I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks. That's a quote directly from the president.
The president said, you don't know what he's going to do. Fact check, true. The larger question tonight is, does he know what he's going to do? And who are the serious voices and experts, hopefully helping counsel a decision that will affect all of us? I want to bring in David Rothkopf, who has foreign policy experience, now writes for the Daily Beast. He worked with the Clinton White House. He hosts, Deep State Radio. And we consider you a serious guy, serious person. The president is the way he is. I want to be as fair as possible. His rhetorical style or milking a moment doesn't mean that it will automatically be bad policy, but there certainly seems to be something haphazard so far. What are you keeping your eye on right now?
Well, I think, you're right to call the debate on TV freewheeling, and that's fine. Good to have a freewheeling reality show. Bad to have a freewheeling White House at a moment of incredible danger for the world. And that's where we are. That's what I'm focused on. I think the word freewheeling is actually a little bit charitable. What you have is chaos and dysfunction in the White House right now. Trump was against action. When the Israelis struck, the first thing that happened was Marco Rubio issued a statement saying, then when the next morning it looked like it was good, Trump was like, well, maybe this was all part of my 4-dimensional chess plan. Then he started getting pushback and he's like, well, maybe we won't, maybe we will. And then it's like, you don't know what I'm going to do. But the clear message to the world is he doesn't know what he's going to do.
Yeah.
And you're right. You're right. Should Pete Hegseth be involved in this? No, and I think he's not involved because he's a nitwit. If you saw him in front of the Congress this week, he was flummoxed by the most basic questions. Tulsi Gabbard is being kept out of it because she's taken a kind of strongly anti-war stance, and he doesn't want that. And so,
and let me jump in because you're referring to, it is true people see her as anti-war. She also has sort of had a different view of what she says the intelligence shows, and we've had many big debates about intel in this country in that region. Trump has been dismissive of that, though, which again suggests the type of breakdown that even some of Trump's MAGA fellow travelers said was a problem with Iraq. I'm not saying it's the exact same, but take a look at this on the nukes.
The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003.
Something testified in March that the intelligence community said Iran wasn't building a nuclear weapon.
I don't care what she said. I think they were very close to happen.
David.
Well, this has been the view of the intelligence community for a while. Of course, the best way to keep them from having a nuclear weapon would have been to honor the agreements struck under the Obama administration, the JCPOA, which would have kept them from having a nuclear weapon. They've moved closer because in 2018, Trump pulled us out of that agreement. But if you agree with the intelligence community, then taking action, as the Israelis did, doesn't make any sense. And I think Trump wants to leave his options open. I think right now, the reason he said, well, let's call it 2-week notice on this, which, by the way, he does all the time, and then it never manifests itself. He thinks 2 weeks is the impossible future. I think what he hopes is that there can still be a negotiated settlement.
Yeah,
and you mentioned the threat of him getting involved. Yes.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned I showed what they're saying about the lack of nuclear progress, the president just dismissing it out of hand. As for Israel, on the one hand, they have been attacked and decided post-October 7th to not only be more assertive in Gaza, which we've all seen, but in Lebanon and now Iran. So they have their reasons. On the other hand, Netanyahu has been talking about almost immediate risk of a nuclear Iran for a long time, which at least undercuts the idea that it's immediate. I want to read from some of the report in the New York Times saying that contrary to Netanyahu's current Israeli government claims, officials were unaware, at least here in the U.S., of any new intel showing the Iranians were rushing to build a nuclear bomb. Where does that fit in? And in your experience, especially having worked in state and in government, is this a knowable thing right now?
Well, we have pretty exquisite intelligence about what's going on in Iran. And I think we've been tracking this very closely, as has the entire international community. They've made some progress. They're able to enrich to a much higher level than they were before because we pulled out of this agreement. But it's a lot of steps from being able to enrich to 60% to getting to 90%, which is weapons grade, to building a bomb, to then have it, or a warhead, and then having the ability to deliver it. I should also point out, though, and this is important in all of this, that even if we strike, it's unlikely we will end this program. We will delay the program. And so strikes won't achieve the goal. Netanyahu says he's doing it because of the nuclear threat, but Netanyahu's been itching for war with Iran for 25 years. And the reason he's doing a lot of what he's doing right now, and we have to be honest about this, is his own political jeopardy in Israel. And he has, for the past couple of years, been fighting wars because they distract the public from his own political and legal problems. And that's, I think as big a driver of where we are right now as anything that's going on in Iran.
Yeah, and it's an important view or criticism of how he has approached this. And while sometimes the foreign discussion of Israel seems to be almost like a monolith, just as there are many views on Trump in this country, for years, there was a much broader Israeli left that opposed Netanyahu, that had him out of office at one point, and to say nothing of the corruption investigations you mentioned. And now, as you say, he's trying to do more, not only when he has a free hand, but perhaps for the domestic political reasons, which are not usually a good reason to wage full-scale war. David Rothkopf, I think we covered a couple key points here on a serious topic here. So thank you for leading us off. We appreciate your insights. Let me tell folks what's coming up. We have our shortest break on the beat at 90 seconds. We're going to turn to why so much of the D.C. class is missing the biggest story in the country right now, these protests. And that's something Rachel has talked about. When we come back, I'm going to show you why that matters so much. And later in the show, Alex Wagner on Donald Trump's double talk on the deficit. We'll be right back. The nationwide broad resistance against President Trump's agenda is growing measurably. We saw the No Kings protest with over 5 million people across 2,000 cities and towns, and the media covered it as it happened, which undercuts some of the other narrative in D.C. especially about a supposedly weakened or exhausted Trump resistance.
Demonstrators gathered in large cities and small towns from coast to coast to oppose President Trump's policies.
Demonstrations spotted in Phoenix, Raleigh, and West Palm Beach, just to name a few.
Accused the president of stepping into authoritarianism.
About 100 to 250,000 protesters have filled this street. This was a historic day of protest in the U.S.
The opposition against him is big, deep, growing, confident, and increasingly unstoppable.
Growing and increasingly unstoppable, as Rachel put it. And that reflects something that we can measure. This is a big deal. It wasn't just a one-off or a one day, even though it was quite the historic turnout for a day. And if you get out of sort of the endless sort of political narrative thing and just look at, say, how papers and people on the ground saw it, major cities to small towns, this is front page. This was big. It happened in a way that really got that local traction as the lived experience of huge gatherings far outside of campaign season. Around the world, many look over at the United States and recognize this as huge civic action, something that in some countries is a more common and frankly, sometimes more respected contemporary occurrence than it is here. And yet tonight, days later, here we are. Much of the political world has moved on. And the DC press And again, like any grouping, there's caveats and exceptions, but a lot of the DC press viewed this as a 1 or 2 day story. But is it? These protests are ongoing. And if they're just a 1 or 2 day story, the premise would be that it's somehow routine. Thing happened, tell you about it the day of, day after, move on. But right now, I want to go through the evidence that states otherwise. That we are not witnessing some small or routine thing, but rather a gigantic awakening and ongoing effort to resist what are extreme, sometimes rare events coming out of Trump's White House. When I say rare, I mean seizing powers that no one's tried in a half century. Sending in the National Guard, no one's tried that without a governor's approval in 60 years. Telling the Supreme Court sometimes they might not follow things and then weeks later following it. We don't have that on the modern record, not since the Civil War. Now, if this isn't getting the right coverage, by which I mean accurate, it could partly be because the media landscape is changing. Much of the more modern new media spaces are on digital and podcast platforms, and they currently lean right. And that might be a space where the protests are not a week-long story, not something they're celebrating, maybe not something they even want to get into the day it happens. Now, a longtime media member and critic, The Guardian's Margaret Sullivan, who's worked as an ombudsman, thinks deeply about how the press works. Even before the protest, she wrote about how the media in DC and elsewhere sometimes ignores anti-Trump protests because the companies are afraid that prominent protest coverage will be criticized by the right as partisan. And they, the press, cannot bear that label. She also argues that not only is the problem of fear going on, which is ironically something that the protests are protesting about, right? You fear a government reaction, you fear the powerful right wing saying you're partisan, but that's what the protesters are saying. We should have free speech regardless of what they say. She also argues that there's a kind of capitalist catering that goes on when conservatives have the upper hand right now, and they did show improving numbers in the elections. Quote, corporate media decision makers are fearful of losing right-leaning readers and viewers, she argues. So that's some of the concern from a very experienced member of the press. She's worked with big outlets about what's happening. But honest press is supposed to be honest, not catering to a bottom line. And that takes us to another piece of this tonight. Because some of the same types of outlets, looking at another protest movement that was smaller than this one, thought it was more important, treated it as a long-term story, even with far smaller numbers than this past weekend. Any guesses out there? I can hear you in your living rooms. I'm talking about the right-wing Tea Party, which grew in response to Obama being elected and had people out in the streets and was treated by these same outlets I'm mentioning as a huge, big, important deal. It was treated as a political fact almost among many outlets and DC types that the Democrats and Obama himself, newly elected with a mandate, would have to take this seriously and respond to the concerns of this big protest movement. It was covered more than 1 or 2 days. And their turnout numbers were much lower than this past weekend, but many in the press thought the Tea Party was a game changer.
The media, all they're talking about, or strangely not talking about, are the Tea Parties. For the life of them, they can't figure out what these Tea Parties are.
Thousands of activists held rallies in cities across the country protesting big government.
Fox News covered these Tea Parties, and we were one of the only organizations to give it any publicity or PR.
A movement champion.
Everything is big in Texas
By high-profile conservatives.
We watched Mary on Fox News with her, 12 protesters, and that's really where it started.
So what started as perhaps organic and then also had a lot of money from the Koch brothers and other things got some momentum, but it also got a lot of air cover, a lot of national emphasis on the Tea Party. And it wasn't an isolated incident.
Here's Fox correspondent Griff Jenkins doing a live shot, and keep an eye on what his producer is doing.
Now, call me old-fashioned. I don't think a producer should be whipping up the crowd. If Glenn Beck wants to be a cheerleader for conservative protests, fine. But what you just saw amounts to choreographing the story to get people hollering.
Well, people were hollering. But given that we have this actual recent comparison, the Trump era came after the Obama era, let's just look at the facts of those protests. Because at the time, the demonstrators numbered into the tens of thousands, according to a September 2009 account in the New York Times. Now, that's a big protest. I've been to cover protests. Sometimes a few thousand feels like a lot if they're packed in and loud. Tens of thousands is certainly big, and you can cover it. But where does that compare to 5 million people in one day this weekend? Indeed, at their height, the Tea Party estimates would still have you, and we checked this today, be 1/20th of what we saw just this weekend alone. 20 times the number of protests. And remember, unlike some of that Glenn Beck stuff, the No Kings rally, shout out to some of the organizers, best we can tell, was organized, but from the ground up. You did not see a Glenn Beck type on the left, let alone many elected Democrats actually taking the lead. Now, there's a broader history in this country, of course. Protests so large they could not be ignored. Consider back in the early 60s when MLK led the history-making March on Washington. And within months, there was polling that most Americans thought even a peaceful protest like that, and again, there was other controversies in that era, but even peaceful protests, mass demonstrations, would hurt the fight for racial equality. We mentioned that with a note of humility. The people then, like the people now, including me, the voice you're hearing, don't know what's going to happen. We could be wrong. They were wrong because they overwhelmingly thought it would hurt, and they were skeptical of getting out there. Today, we have millions of Americans mobilized in a way that is absolutely huge. Now, one Harvard study of the Tea Party showed that Republicans thought they were improving their voter turnout because the protests did bring in new people. And there's a long-running debate over whether that kind of energy ultimately was a precursor to the MAGA era, and a party that was once seen as back on its heels definitely got aggressive. Does any of this translate to the Democrats in the coming elections? We don't know. But apart from elections themselves, we are living through something that is as big as the people involved, and the narrators, whether they're on podcasts or traditional DC media, might be missing it, might be treating this as a 1 or 2 day thing that's not as big as the Tea Party, when if you check the numbers, at its height, it's 20 times the turnout and national movement of that sometimes very hyped Tea Party movement. So where do we go from here? I have someone who's been in politics so long, he was deeply enmeshed in that Obama era, Cheko Manduri, with his thoughts when we return.
I do believe the most important office in a democracy is the office of citizen, that change happens because ordinary people get together and reimagine what their lives could be and push on the system.
President Obama this week on Citizens Pushing. We're joined by an Obama veteran, Cheko Manduri. Che, do people know, and is it covered as the truth, that just this weekend dwarfed the Tea Party by 20 times?
It's really not been covered that way. The No Kings protests have only gotten a fraction of the coverage that the Tea Party got. The Tea Party was able to sustain a narrative that lasted from 2009 to 2010 into the midterms and then beyond. And I think that there's probably two reasons for that. One is psychologically, it is very ingrained in Americans and in the media that the Tea Party people were the real America, and this was an uprising from the real America. You know, when we say somebody is a typical American, you know, we think of the couple in the Grant Wood American Gothic painting. We think of when you talk about Americana, we think about the stuff that you buy at the gift store of a Cracker Barrel. It is very, very ingrained in the media, in Americans themselves, both consciously and subconsciously, that the real America are the people who go to Tea Party rallies, are the people who vote for MAGA. They are white, they are rural, and they're often very angry. But the No Kings protests are portrayed as a bunch of urban elites on the coasts. They represent a small fraction of Ivy League graduates, and none of this is true. The No Kings protest was nationwide. Places like Chattanooga, Tennessee, saw large protests as much as places like New York and Los Angeles. And that's the narrative that really that the both people who care about American politics and care about where American culture is going need to push back on.
And how aware or unaware do you think people are of what you're calling those perhaps subconscious or other biases?
I think that it's so ingrained in the way that we think about this country. I mean, I remember when Morgan Whalen just a few months ago walked off the set of SNL and said, "I'm going back to God's country," as if New York City is a godless place. I mean, if you go to Harlem on a Sunday morning, those churches, they look like God's country to me. They're as religious as anybody in this country. People in New York City, you have great churches and great church attendance in New York City. But we just have this idea that Democrats are just these coastal elites, and we kind of miss the larger picture about the Democratic Party. I mean, a Democrat was just elected mayor of Omaha. We have elected Democratic senators from Wisconsin, from Michigan, from Pennsylvania, from Arizona, from Georgia. The Democratic Party is a nationwide party. Progressives are all over this country. They are working class progressives who bring tremendous energy to their causes, and and it's often very much underreported by the national media. I also think a big difference between the Tea Party and the No Kings protests, quite frankly, is that the Republican Party really embraced the Tea Party. They embraced the Tea Party message. They became a Tea Party, and that also helped Trump to really kind of and MAGA to end up taking over the party.
You make it such I want to slow you down. You make it such a deep point that it's like sitting right there. But when you put it like that, Ted Cruz ran as a primary candidate against a more experienced individual in Texas, and he said he was a Tea Party candidate. Now, he had Ivy League education, and at one time was talked about as a Supreme Court person, nominee potential. And suddenly he said, no, I'm the populist Tea Party thing. And then we know what MAGA came after that. And so the corollary here would be if the Ted Cruzes of the Democratic Party, people who are presidential candidates, who are elites, were out there saying, I'm a No Kings candidate or I'm an ICE candidate. And while we have seen a little more action with Padilla and Cory Booker and others, so I don't want to overserve the point. I think the evidence supports what you're saying, that that's the exception, not the rule. And you're saying the GOP did well by boldly going to its base.
Yeah, the GOP went where the energy was. And the Democratic leadership, quite frankly, has done the opposite. I mean, there were talking points that were being circulated calling LA a distraction. A distraction. I mean, this is what the Democratic Party cared about. This is what the American people care about. And Democrats would be well to harness that energy and embrace it.
A great point. Really interesting. And I know you've worked on several presidential campaigns, so maybe some folks are listening. As you know, Che, sometimes we quote movies.
Right.
Sometimes we quote musicians.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't know where I'm going. Not unlike Trump said, nobody knows if he's going to bomb Iran. They don't. You don't know where I'm going, do you?
No, I'm breathlessly anticipating what's going to come next year.
A classic in the world of dark arts politics, what the kids might call a banger. Okay, I'm talking about classic Nixon aide John Ehrlichman explaining exactly what you just referred to as the negative depiction of what are even mass movements. I mean, you go back, you watch the right movie now, and you say, gosh, thank goodness there was a Vietnam War protest or civil rights. I mean, these are looked at almost through the lens of nostalgia of progress that had to occur, or even a good and evil narrative, although history is more complicated. But here's Ehrlichman, Jay. The Nixon White House had two enemies, the anti-war left and, quote, and I'm quoting from him at that time, obviously, quote, black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities, vilify them night after night on the evening news. For Ehrlichman, channeling the dark arts of Nixon, president who was removed, ousted, pushed out as a Republican president for all kinds of misconduct, Ehrlichman viewed the legal crackdown and the evening news as synonymously important to undercut what otherwise was, in their view, a potently powerful protest movement. Do you see any echo of that today?
I do not see an echo of that on the Democratic side. I do see a lot of echoes of that on the Republican side and the Trump side. That is exactly what they're doing with the ICE raids as well, which is you go towards both the conscious and the unconscious. You consciously talk about enforcing the law and saying that these people are lawbreakers and they should be deported, all of those things. But then you subconsciously go towards tribalism, towards a sense that we are losing our identity as a white Christian nation. That is a subconscious thing that is going on simultaneous with the conscious attack. Democrats really don't do that. It's all about policy. You know, if you ask the Democrats like what we should talk about, they'll bring up all their talking points. You know, they'll bring up all their policy positions. They'll go only to the conscious mind. They rarely, if ever, go to the unconscious mind and really talk about people's fears and also their hopes. Our best Democratic politicians actually did do that. They talked specifically to the positive elements of the human soul and their hopes. Obama, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, etc.
Yeah, you made several incisive points. I'm not just saying that because we've gotten to know you and we like you. I think these are deep points. And the last one you made about the sheer politics of it, which overlay the protest movements that we've seen on either side. Yeah, to your point, a lot of Republican politicians have the folks walking into the restaurant and they're talking about the food. We're going to bring out a big steak. We'll bring out fries. And we got a brownie sundae after that if you're interested. And Democrats come along with the nutritional label. And they're telling you about the ingredients, and just so you know, and it's a protein, but you should also know the fat, and you're looking at a nutritional label, and people order more off the menu than the nutritional label, in my experience.
People also will ask the waitress what's good, and they'll go with that as well. You know, that kind of human interaction, talking to people at the grassroots. In their communities, asking them what they care about. That's something that Democrats do too little of, actually. A lot of it is, you know, consulting economics textbooks and crafting legislation in the halls of Congress.
You came back with chatting with the waitress. If I had more time in this segment, I would torture this metaphor one more round. I'm not above doing that. But we got some other stuff coming up tonight. So our thanks to Che Komanduri. We have a lot, including Elon Musk's latest problem, when we come back. Elon Musk said he's leaving the Trump administration to focus on his companies, including SpaceX, which needs his help. They just had a rocket explode on the launch pad. We're going to show you how that played out on one of these popular space live streams.
Yeah, probably. I mean, even the other day when they... Whoa!
What?
That's not good.
Oh my God. Just a massive explosion there. We're going to keep it moving here. We have a very special segment coming up with Alex Wagner and someone making their Beat debut.
This is your guy. You got to roll with the policies he enacts. And why should the rest of the country that didn't vote for him be bailing out farmers?
Funk on a whole new level. The rhythm is the bass and the bass is the treble.
Time for a special edition of Fallback. And we have two special guests together, MSNBC's Alex Wagner, the enterprising anchor and reporter, host of the Trumpland podcast, former editor-in-chief of the acclaimed music magazine Fader. Heyo.
Heyo.
Look at that.
What?
Yeah.
That's a long time ago.
And rapper Warren G, pioneer of the G-Funk sound, who worked with Tupac, Dr. Dre, and Snoop, who's a longtime collaborator on hits like Ain't No Fun. The homies can't have none.
Yeah.
The two also reunited just recently at the BET Awards on stage. Warren G is cemented as a hip-hop icon for his triple platinum album, Regulate, G-Funk Era, featuring the Grammy-nominated hit, Regulate. Rolling Stone crowned it one of the best West Coast rap songs of all time.
Yes.
It peaked at number 2 among all genres of the Billboard Hot 100 with a much-imitated flow that mixed a smooth kind of streetwise energy with the cadence of Edgar Allan Poe. Quote, "It was a clear black night, a clear white moon."
They got guns to my head, I think I'm going down. I can't believe it's happening in my own town. If I had wings, I would fly, let me contemplate. I glance in the cut and I see my homie Nate Funk on a whole new level. The rhythm is the bass and the bass is the treble. Murder was the case that they gave me. Falling for the trap, doing rap, that's what saved me.
Hey, Warren G and Alex W.
So happy. I don't even know how to
Great to have you
explain
guys
it now.
together.
I can't contain my enthusiasm. You didn't talk about this DJ, one of my personal hits, but favorite.
Respect.
Not my hit, your hit.
Great to have you here.
Wait, I'm happy to be here.
We're very thrilled.
Yes, indeed.
Respect. Well, we always go home team first. So, Alex, what's on your fallback list?
I have thrown a lot of birthday parties
Okay.
for myself. None of them have cost $45 million. And I'd like to think, everyone at this table, that if I threw a $45 million party, it would be a lot more fun than whatever President Trump threw for himself in terms of this military parade that is costing the American taxpayer $45 million. It is offensive for the party that pretends to be that of fiscal conservatism to stomach this. It is offensive for representative democracy to be so in thrall of its dear leader that they allow these displays of military hardware in honor of his ego and not much else. But also, it's just a terrible party. If you're going to throw a big party for your 79th birthday, I can't even remember which one it is at this point. Shouldn't it be better than that?
Yeah, and look, there are people who overspend sometimes. They end up getting bottle service. They get the sparklers. And you say this was too expensive of a birthday, but at least that's their own.
I've never thought a sparkler was too expensive.
Well,
but
that service, that service can be extra.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be, but that's their money. Your point is he's also spending the people's money.
He's spending the people's money on something that's completely unnecessary as they're literally trying to take health care from millions of Americans, casting immigration dragnets that are going to have an incredibly negative effect on the American economy, to say nothing of American society. And we have what is, just a stunning display of ego and selfishness.
I think it's a fair fallback. Warren G., what's on your list? I know you were looking at the Trump-Musk feud and then Musk backing down.
I think it's just two friends just having a friendly argument real quick and,
You're ready to move past it.
So you maybe didn't take it that serious because they're both entertainers. They're both big on socials. And so they have a week where they do this and you kind of knew they're going to keep it moving.
Yeah, but is there a red line? Like, is there something your friend can't, if there's something like Snoop could have said to you back in the day that would have been like, nope, we're not good anymore? Or is it all good?
It's all good. We've been around each other since elementary school, so it's we'll talk mess to each other here and there, but I might be mad for a second, then I'll be like, look, let's life is too short to be going back and forth, so let's
That's generous.
Too short.
Generous friendship.
Too Short, also a California rapper.
Yes, indeed. That's my guy.
Is there a question there? That's a statement. Yes,
It's a statement.
that is correct.
I'm just hanging out with you guys.
Yeah,
It's just a statement.
we're just talking about friendship, red lines, and Snoop.
Yes, indeed.
Do you know how to spell Too Short, Alex?
With a $sign. Come on, who do you think I am, Ari?
Fader Magazine. We both love music.
Person who loves hip hop.
Yeah, we love your
of the art.
respect. We love your
I'm
music.
here with Warren G. Nothing has to be said. We can just sit here and marinate talent.
So a lot of people are big up. They big up themselves. They go big. We were noticing you got the lowercase G on the chain. Tell me about that.
It's just the G. I spelled I did my album with the lowercase G just to be different from everybody, and I started it with the G Funk, making the lowercase, the G, and then the big funk, and then the big era, just to let them know it's lowercase, but it's I'm still a big G, but I just wanted to be different from everybody else and not just put the capital G on there. I wanted to make it look different, make my G look different from everybody.
Now, this is actually a funny thing. Where when you're distinct and different in art, at first they're like, you're different, and then everyone copies you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because we talk about G-Funk sound, we talk about what we just played with you and Nate, with you and Snoop. At the time, you were creating something new, a different sound. And then, as you know, everybody tried to sound like you guys.
Yeah. That's what happens when you create a new sound. You know, it's like a trend. Everybody want to jump on the trend, and that's what was happening. People was jumping on the trend and wanted to get the music to sound like what we was doing because it was different. And today, right now, a lot of artists are craving the golden era still, which was the 90s.
Yeah.
And a lot of the younger artists want to have that feel up under them right now. So I get calls.
And people don't know this. When Alex was at Fader, for a while, she thought it would be cool if she went by Alex W instead of Alex Wagner, like Warren G. And then people were like, it doesn't feel
No,
the
it doesn't
same.
work for me. I can't drop 16 bars. Like I don't have it in me, but that's okay. I'm a
it's
big
not hard.
fan.
You can do it.
I do want to ask you about the name though, because
And let me show you the banner and then keep talking. But look at the banner.
that's like, someone at home screen grab that for me, please? I need that.
As we say on the news, that's what's up. Great to have you.
Thanks for
Please
having
come back.
Yeah.
Alex
Alex
W.
W.
As always, that does it for us.